My beloved child. Stop scrolling for a moment, because what you are about to hear was meant to find you at the exact moment your heart was ready to understand it. There is something you have been carrying quietly, something you learned to hide so well that even the people closest to you began believing you were completely fine. You smiled when you wanted to disappear. You said, "I'm okay," when there were nights when you could barely convince yourself to keep going. You became skilled at changing the subject whenever anyone came close to the truth. But your soulmate found out. And that is why everything feels different now. Not because they discovered something shameful. Not because they found something that makes you less worthy of love. They discovered something much deeper. They discovered the part of you that you thought nobody would ever understand. And when they saw it, something inside them changed. Pause here for a moment and breathe slowly. Because this is not a story about someone discovering your weakness and walking away. It is about someone discovering the depth of what you have survived in silence and suddenly realizing that they never truly knew how much you had been carrying. There was a moment when your soulmate was alone, looking at something connected to you. Maybe it was an old message. Maybe it was a photograph. Maybe it was something you once said without explaining what you meant. Maybe somebody finally told them a piece of your story that you had deliberately kept hidden. Whatever the doorway was, it opened. And behind that doorway was a version of you they had never seen. The quiet you. The exhausted you. The you who gave more than you received. The you who stayed strong because you believed there was nobody else who could carry the weight for you. And when your soulmate realized this, they sat in silence. They replayed conversations. They remembered your expressions. They remembered the moments when you suddenly became distant. They remembered the times you said you needed space. They remembered every time you laughed something off. And suddenly, details that once seemed insignificant began connecting like pieces of a puzzle. They remembered asking, "What's wrong?" And you saying, "Nothing." They remembered looking into your eyes and sensing something you wouldn't explain. They remembered you changing the subject. They remembered the way you sometimes disappeared emotionally even while sitting right beside them. And now they understand. You weren't rejecting them. You were protecting yourself. There is a difference. And heaven wants you to understand that difference tonight. My child, there are people who become quiet because they have nothing to say, and there are people who become quiet because they have too much to say and are terrified that once they begin, everything they have buried will come rushing out. You were the second kind. You didn't hide because you didn't care. You hid because you cared too much. You were afraid that if someone saw the full truth, they might look at you differently. So you became selective with your honesty. You gave people edited versions of your pain. You told them the story without telling them how deeply it affected you. You described what happened without describing what it did to your heart. You said you had moved on before you had. You said you were strong before you felt strong. And eventually, you became so convincing that people stopped asking questions. Even your soulmate didn't realize how much was happening behind your silence. Until now. Something happened that made the truth impossible to ignore. And when your soulmate finally understood it, their first emotion wasn't anger. It was shock. Then sadness. Then regret. And finally, something much more powerful. Recognition. They suddenly recognized the person standing in front of them. Not the version you showed the world. The real you. The person who had spent so long pretending not to need anyone. The person who learned to wipe away tears before anyone could see them. The person who could comfort everyone else while secretly wondering who would comfort them. The person who could say, "Don't worry about me," while desperately wishing someone would say, "No. This time, let me worry about you." Your soulmate discovered that hidden sentence. And it broke something open inside them. They started wondering how many times you had needed them and never asked. How many nights you had wanted to reach out and stopped yourself. How many times you typed a message and deleted it? How many times you wanted reassurance but chose silence because you didn't want to seem needy? How many times you wanted to say, "Please don't leave," but instead said, "Do whatever you want." And suddenly, your soulmate understood that some of your strongest words had been disguises for your deepest fears. That realization stayed with them. They couldn't simply put it down and return to normal. They tried. They went about their day. They answered messages. They spoke to people. They performed ordinary routines. But something had shifted. Because once someone truly sees your hidden pain, they cannot unknow it. And your soulmate began seeing your past conversations differently. A simple, "good night," suddenly sounded different. A delayed reply suddenly carried a different meaning. A moment when you seemed cold suddenly looked like self-protection. A time when you walked away suddenly looked like someone trying not to break down. And they began asking themselves a question that became impossible to escape. How long have they been carrying this alone? That question followed them everywhere. And then another question came. Why didn't they tell me? But the answer was closer than they realized. Because you were afraid. Not necessarily afraid of them. You were afraid of what the truth might do to the connection. You were afraid that if they knew everything, they might see you as damaged. You were afraid they might become overwhelmed. You were afraid they would feel responsible for healing something they didn't create. You were afraid they might love the strong version of you but not know what to do with the wounded version. So you hid. You hid your fears. You hid your disappointments. You hid the moments when you missed them. You hid how deeply certain words affected you. You hid the nights when memories became louder than the present. And most importantly, you hid how much you actually cared. Because caring felt dangerous. If you admitted how much someone mattered, you also had to admit how much losing them could hurt. So you chose silence. But silence has a strange way of revealing things eventually. And your silence finally spoke. Your soulmate heard it. Not with their ears. With their heart. There was a particular moment when the realization became overwhelming. They remembered something you had said months ago. At the time, it sounded ordinary. Now it sounded like a confession disguised as a casual sentence. They remembered your face when you said it. They remembered the pause afterward. They remembered how quickly you changed the subject. And suddenly, they understood. You had been trying to tell them. You simply didn't have the courage to finish the sentence. That memory became almost unbearable. Your soulmate sat there thinking about all the opportunities they had to ask one more question. One more question. That's all it might have taken. Instead, they accepted your "I'm fine." And now they wished they hadn't. They wished they had looked longer. Listened deeper. Asked again. Stayed a little longer. Because they realized that sometimes "I'm fine" isn't an answer. Sometimes it's a locked door. And sometimes the person saying it is secretly hoping someone will knock. My child, your soulmate is beginning to understand that you weren't asking for someone to rescue you. You were hoping for someone safe enough that you wouldn't have to keep rescuing yourself. That is a very different thing. You never wanted someone to carry your entire life. You wanted someone who would sit beside you while you carried it. You didn't need a hero. You needed presence. You didn't need someone to erase your past. You needed someone who wouldn't judge you for having one. And this is where your soulmate's heart began to change. Because they discovered that the person they thought was emotionally distant was actually emotionally overwhelmed. The person they thought didn't care was the person who cared so much that they were terrified of losing control. The person they thought was independent beyond reach was actually someone who had learned independence because dependence had once hurt. Your soulmate finally saw the survival mechanism behind your personality. And suddenly, your behavior made sense. But there is another layer. Something else was discovered. Something you hid even more carefully. You had been sacrificing parts of yourself to keep the connection peaceful. You swallowed questions. You ignored certain disappointments. You accepted less than you wanted because you were afraid asking for more might push them away. You pretended certain things didn't matter. You told yourself you were being mature. You told yourself you were being understanding. You told yourself that love sometimes requires patience. And yes, love requires patience. But heaven wants you to understand something tonight. Patience should never require you to disappear. You had been making yourself smaller without realizing it. You were adjusting. Adapting. Waiting. Understanding. Forgiving. And sometimes, you were doing all of this while secretly hoping someone would notice what it was costing you. Your soulmate finally noticed. And that realization hurt them. Because they began wondering whether they had unknowingly benefited from your silence. Whether they had accepted your sacrifices without understanding them. Whether they had mistaken your tolerance for permission. Whether they had called you strong when what you really needed was support. And this created a storm inside them. They wanted to come toward you. But they were afraid. Because now they knew there was something delicate beneath your strength. They didn't want to say the wrong thing. They didn't want to force you to reveal more than you were ready to reveal. They didn't want to turn your pain into a conversation about themselves. So they became quiet too. And you may have noticed that silence. You may have wondered why their energy feels different. Why their responses seem more thoughtful. Why their eyes seem to linger. Why something feels unfinished between you. Why the connection suddenly feels heavier and deeper at the same time. It is because the old version of the relationship was built partly on what you both knew. The new version is being built on what has finally been understood. And understanding changes everything. Your soulmate is no longer looking at you through the same lens. They are looking at you with a tenderness they didn't know they possessed. But there is something they haven't told you. Something they have been rehearsing in their mind. They have imagined sitting in front of you. No distractions. No other people. No excuses. And saying, I know now. Not, I know everything. Not, I know exactly what you've been through. Just, I know enough to understand why you've been the way you've been. And they imagine what your face would look like. Would you cry? Would you laugh nervously? Would you deny it? Would you finally tell the truth? They don't know. But they want the opportunity. Because the discovery didn't make them want to run. It made them want to come closer. And this is the part you need to hear carefully. Your hidden truth did not destroy the connection. It exposed its foundation. If a connection collapses simply because someone discovers your humanity, then the connection was never safe enough for your deepest self. But if someone discovers your pain and chooses compassion, then something real has begun. Your soulmate is standing at that threshold now. And so are you. There is a reason you have felt unusually emotional lately. A reason certain memories keep returning. A reason you suddenly feel like something is changing even though nothing obvious has happened. Sometimes the biggest changes begin invisibly. Before the conversation, there is a realization. Before the realization, there is a moment of silence. Before the silence, there is a truth. And your truth has already been discovered. The question is what happens next. Your soulmate has been thinking about the moment when you finally tell them everything. Not because they want information. Because they want intimacy. They want to know the story behind the person they love. They want to understand what made you afraid. They want to understand what taught you not to ask for help. They want to know what happened when nobody was watching. They want to know which version of you hide from everyone. And maybe most importantly, they want to know what you need now. Not what you needed 5 years ago. Not what you pretended you needed yesterday. What you need now. Because your soulmate has realized something painful. They may have spent too much time trying to understand your behavior and not enough time understanding your heart. And now they want to correct that. But they are carrying their own regret. They remember moments when you reached toward them emotionally and they didn't notice. They remember moments when you needed reassurance and they responded with logic. They remember moments when you wanted closeness and they interpreted it as pressure. They remember moments when you pulled away and assumed you didn't care. Now they see the pattern. You reached. They misunderstood. You became quiet. They gave you space. You interpreted that space as abandonment. They interpreted your silence as independence. And the cycle continued. Neither of you fully understood what was happening. Until the hidden truth surfaced. And now the cycle can end. This is why everything feels different. Because the misunderstanding has been interrupted. Your soulmate knows more now. And knowledge creates responsibility. Once they know that your silence sometimes hides pain, they cannot casually ignore it. Once they know that your independence sometimes hides fear, they cannot pretend not to see it. Once they know that you have been sacrificing your needs to preserve the connection, they must decide what kind of person they want to be. And that decision is already happening inside them. They are choosing between the old way and the new way. The old way says, let them handle it. The new way says, stay. The old way says, they didn't ask. The new way says, maybe they shouldn't have to. The old way says, give them space. The new way says, give them safety. And something inside your soulmate is moving toward the second choice. But there is one thing they still don't understand. They don't yet know how much you have hidden. They discovered one truth. But behind that truth are other truths. And this is where your story becomes deeper. Because the thing your soulmate discovered wasn't the entire secret. It was only the first layer. There is another part of your story you have almost never spoken about. A part connected to a decision you made long ago. A decision that changed how you love. A decision that taught you to expect less. A decision that made you promise yourself you would never again allow another person to have enough power over your heart to completely break you. You thought that promise protected you. And for a while, it did. But it also created distance. It taught you how to love while keeping one foot near the exit. It taught you how to care without fully surrendering. It taught you how to say goodbye before anyone had actually left. And your soulmate has begun sensing that. They realize that sometimes when you seem calm, you're actually preparing for loss. Sometimes when you say, it's okay if this doesn't work, you are secretly preparing your heart for rejection. Sometimes when you don't fight for something, it isn't because you don't value it. It's because part of you believes that fighting for love makes you vulnerable to humiliation. Your soulmate is beginning to see this. And it terrifies them. Not because you are difficult to love. Because they finally understand how easy it would be to lose you without realizing you were already slipping away. There is a difference between someone leaving loudly and someone leaving quietly. Loud departure gives you a warning. Quiet departure doesn't. And your soulmate suddenly realizes that you are capable of the second kind. You could disappear without creating a scene. You could stop asking. Stop explaining. Stop waiting. Stop hoping. You could become peaceful without them. And that possibility has awakened something in them. Not possession. Not control. Recognition. They finally understand that your heart cannot be taken for granted. They understand that love is not maintained simply because two people once felt something powerful. It requires presence. Honesty. Courage. And now they are wondering whether they have been brave enough. You see, my child, Sometimes heaven doesn't change two people by bringing them closer. Sometimes heaven changes them by revealing what they were too afraid to acknowledge. Your soulmate needed to see your hidden truth. And you needed to know that being seen does not automatically mean being rejected. This is the lesson unfolding. You spent so long believing that being fully known would make you less lovable. But what if the opposite is true? What if being fully known is the doorway to being fully loved? What if the person who sees your tears doesn't think you're weak? What if they finally understand the strength it took to hide them? What if the person who learns your fears doesn't become burdened by them? What if they become more intentional with your heart? What if the truth you thought would end everything becomes the very thing that finally makes the relationship honest? That possibility is what your soulmate is wrestling with right now. And there is something beautiful about their realization. They aren't only thinking about what you have hidden. They are thinking about what they have hidden. Because when one person becomes vulnerable, the other person often discovers their own masks. Your soulmate has their own secrets. Their own fears. Their own regrets. Their own moments when they pretended not to care. Their own nights when they missed you. Their own questions they were too afraid to ask. And now they understand something. You were both hiding. You were both protecting yourselves. You were both waiting for the other person to feel safe first. And because neither wanted to be the first to become completely vulnerable, the connection became filled with unanswered questions. But now one secret has been exposed. And secrets rarely travel alone. The truth you hid has begun pulling other truths into the light. Your soulmate is starting to understand why certain moments between you felt strangely intense. Why a simple conversation could affect you both for days. Why distance never felt completely like distance. Why even when you tried to move forward, something kept bringing the memory back. Why the connection seemed to survive things that should have ended it. Maybe the answer isn't that everything was meant to happen exactly as you imagined. Maybe the answer is simpler. You both had something to learn. You had to learn that love does not require self-erasure. They had to learn that loving someone means learning how to recognize what isn't being said. And now the lesson is becoming visible. Your soulmate is no longer asking, why are they like this? They are asking, what happened to them? That is a profound shift. Because judgment asks what is wrong with someone. Compassion asks what happened. And your soulmate has crossed that line. They are no longer trying to solve you. They are trying to understand you. They want to know the person beneath the defense. The person beneath the silence. The person beneath the independence. The person who still wants to believe that love can be safe. And maybe you have been waiting for exactly that. Not someone who says, I can fix you. But someone who says, you don't have to hide from me. Those words may be closer than you think. But before they can be spoken, something else must happen. You must stop punishing yourself for having hidden. You must stop thinking that your silence made you dishonest. You were surviving with the tools you had. You don't have to celebrate every decision you made. You don't have to pretend every defense mechanism was healthy. But you can understand why they existed. You can forgive the version of yourself who didn't know how to communicate what the present version of you finally understands. And your soulmate must do the same. They must forgive themselves for not seeing sooner. They must stop replaying every missed opportunity. Because regret can become another form of avoidance. The goal isn't to live inside, I should have. The goal is to ask, what can I do now? And that is the question your soulmate is approaching. What can I do now? How can I show them that I know? How can I make them feel safe enough to speak? How can I prove that their truth won't scare me away? How can I stop asking them to be strong every second? How can I become someone they don't have to hide from? These questions are growing inside them. And soon, they may no longer be able to remain silent. But listen carefully. The first conversation may not look dramatic. It may be quiet, simple, almost ordinary. They may ask how you are. And this time, they may not accept the automatic answer. They may look at you and wait. They may say, "No, really." And that tiny sentence may carry everything. Because for the first time, they won't be asking out of curiosity. They'll be asking because they already know there is more. And you may feel your defenses rising. You may want to laugh. You may want to change the subject. You may want to say, "I'm fine." But something inside you will know that this time is different. Because the person asking has already seen behind the curtain. And suddenly, you won't need to explain everything. You may only need to tell the first truth. The smallest truth. The one you can say without breaking open completely. Maybe. I was scared. Maybe. I didn't know how to tell you. Maybe. I cared more than I admitted. Maybe. I thought if you knew everything, you'd leave. And if the moment comes, remember this. You don't owe anyone every detail of your pain. Vulnerability is not the same as surrendering your boundaries. You can reveal your truth slowly. You can choose what to share. You can protect your privacy while still allowing someone to know your heart. That is what healthy love looks like. Not forced confession. Safe revelation. And your soulmate is beginning to understand that. They don't need every answer tonight. They need the door to be unlocked. You can open it 1 inch. They can wait. You can open it another inch. They can listen. And slowly, two people who once communicated through silence can begin communicating through truth. That is the transformation waiting at the center of this story. But my child, there is one final revelation you need to hear. The thing your soulmate found out wasn't only about your past. It was also about your present. They discovered that despite everything you have endured, despite every reason you had to become cold, despite every reason you had to stop believing, there is still a part of you that wants love. You still hope. You still care. You still imagine what it would feel like to be chosen without having to compete for attention. You still want someone who doesn't make you question your worth. You still want a connection where silence doesn't mean punishment. You still want to be held emotionally without being controlled. And your soulmate realized something astonishing. They may be one of the few people who has ever seen both sides of you. The strength. And the softness. The independence. And the longing. The confidence. And the fear. The person who says, "I don't need anyone." And the person who secretly wishes someone would stay. They finally see the contradiction. And instead of judging it, they understand it. You became strong because you had to. But being strong doesn't mean you don't deserve tenderness. You learned independence because dependence once frightened you. But independence doesn't mean you must live without support. You learned to hide because being seen once hurt. But hiding forever will eventually hurt too. And perhaps that is why this moment has arrived. Not to expose you. To free you. Your hidden truth is not a weapon against you. It is a doorway. And your soulmate is standing on the other side. They know now. They know why you became quiet. They know why you pulled away. They know why you acted like certain things didn't matter. They know why you protected your heart. And they know something else. You never stopped caring. That realization may be the one thing they needed to hear. Because while you were afraid they would reject the hidden version of you, they were secretly afraid that the distant version of you meant you no longer cared. Both of you were afraid of the same thing. Losing each other. You simply expressed that fear differently. You withdrew. They hesitated. You became quiet. They became uncertain. You waited. They waited. And now the waiting is becoming unbearable. Something is changing. The next conversation between you may carry more truth than every conversation before it. A question may finally be asked. An apology may finally be offered. A confession may finally escape. And when that happens, you may realize that the person you thought was simply observing your life was actually struggling with their own emotions. They were not unaffected. They were confused. They were afraid. They were trying to understand what they were feeling. And now they have a reason. They found out what you had been hiding. They found out how deeply you were affected. They found out how much you had sacrificed. They found out that your silence was not emptiness. It was a language. And now they are learning how to speak it. So don't rush what is unfolding. Don't chase. Don't force a confession. Don't demand immediate answers. Let truth do what pressure never can. Let the person who finally understands you choose their next step freely. And meanwhile, choose yourself. Stop believing that your worth depends on whether your soulmate returns, stays, apologizes, confesses, or changes. Your worth existed before this connection. Your soul had value before they discovered your secret. Your future does not depend on another person's ability to understand your heart. But if they do understand it, if they choose compassion, if they choose honesty, if they choose to meet you in the middle, then perhaps this painful discovery becomes something beautiful, not because pain was necessary, but because truth finally became stronger than fear. My beloved child, you have spent enough time hiding the parts of yourself you thought made you difficult to love. You are allowed to be human. You are allowed to have scars. You are allowed to have fears. You are allowed to admit that something hurt. You are allowed to say that you miss someone. You are allowed to need reassurance. You are allowed to say, I don't know. You are allowed to say, I'm afraid. And you are allowed to say, I love you. Not because you are weak. Because you are brave enough to be real. Your soulmate's discovery has changed the connection because the illusion is gone. The illusion that you were always okay. The illusion that nothing affected you. The illusion that you didn't care. The illusion that your silence meant indifference. The illusion that your strength meant you needed nothing. That illusion is gone. And perhaps, for the first time, there is room for something real. Something quieter. Something deeper. Something that doesn't need games. Something that doesn't need guessing. Something that doesn't require either of you to pretend. Your soulmate now knows that behind your calm exterior was a heart that had been fighting a private battle. And instead of turning away, they are standing closer to the truth. They may not know what to say yet. They may not know exactly what they will do. But they know one thing. They don't want to misunderstand you anymore. And that realization is already changing them. Tonight, while you wonder whether they feel anything, they may be wondering whether you will ever let them see everything. While you wonder whether they care, they may be replaying every moment when they failed to show it. While you wonder whether the connection meant something, they may be realizing just how much it meant. And somewhere between your silence and their realization, something has finally awakened. Not a fantasy. Not a promise that everything will magically happen. A choice. The choice to tell the truth. The choice to listen. The choice to stop hiding behind pride. The choice to stop confusing distance with safety. The choice to stop waiting for the other person to make the first move emotionally. And if this connection is meant to continue, it will not continue as the old version of itself. It will have to become something more honest. More mature. More compassionate. More real. Because once your soulmate discovered what you had been hiding, the old way of loving you became impossible. They can no longer pretend they don't know. And you can no longer pretend you weren't hoping they would eventually understand. That is why nothing feels the same anymore. The secret has been seen. The silence has been heard. The hidden wound has been recognized. And the person you feared would judge you may be the person finally asking how they can stand beside you. So breathe. Let the truth settle. You don't need to run toward them. You don't need to run away either. Stand where you are. Let yourself be seen gradually. Let your heart speak without forcing it. And if the moment comes when they finally look at you and say, "I know," don't immediately panic. Don't assume the worst. Listen to what comes next. Because after those two words, there may be an apology. There may be an explanation. There may be a confession. There may be something you have been waiting to hear for far longer than you realize. And perhaps the most surprising part will not be what they say about your secret. It will be what they confess about their own. Because while they were discovering what you had been hiding, they were carrying something they never told you either. Something connected to the very reason they couldn't let you go. Something they realized only after learning your truth. Something that changes the meaning of every distance, every silence, every almost confession between you. And when they finally reveal it, you may understand why heaven allowed this hidden truth to surface now. Because the secret they discovered was never the end of your story. It was the key that unlocked theirs. And the moment they finally tell you what they have been hiding from you, you will understand why nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. For now, rest. You don't have to solve tomorrow tonight. You don't have to force an answer. You don't have to chase a sign. You don't have to prove your worth. The truth has already begun moving. And sometimes, when truth begins moving, silence becomes impossible to maintain forever. Your soulmate knows now. They know what you hid. They know why you hid it. They know your strength was real, but it was never the whole story. And somewhere deep within them, a decision is forming. A decision that could change the direction of this connection completely. Because the next time they come toward you, they may not come with the same questions. They may come with an answer. And that answer begins with a confession they have been terrified to make. A confession about what they felt the very moment they discovered the truth about you. That is where the next chapter begins. And when they finally say those words, you will realize that the secret you thought would make them leave was the very truth that finally taught them how deeply they wanted to stay.